Welcome to IDL, the business trailblazer podcast for seasoned innovators, rising disruptors, and inspiring leaders. I'm your host, Chris Britton, and today's bright business mind is Jeremy Smith of Neural Voice. Jeremy is a leader in an area that's often talked about, but little is actually known about, and that is artificial intelligence. Today, we are going to be going on an in-depth conversation to find out a little bit more about AI, natural language processing, natural language understanding, what all of that means, and how it could also benefit you from a business point of view, and everything that you currently most likely fear, but probably shouldn't be. So, Jeremy, welcome to this podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Chris. Great to be here.
You're very, very welcome. So for our audience members who may not be that familiar with AI, it's a term that gets bandied around all the time. You hear it all. There's a lot of hype in the news, and especially affects the stock market. So do you want to start by explaining a little bit about what AI means to most people, and more importantly, what it means to you in Neural Voice?
Yeah, you got loads of different sorts of AI that exist. So AI isn't something new. AI has been around for years and years and years. Like social media algorithms are based on AI. The way you see adverts come to you, there's AI involved in that. What's really taken off in the past 2 to 3 years is generative AI. So this is something being created, essentially. So as you see, image generators being created, words being created based off of a prompt. So generative AI is essentially the generation of something new based off of previous data.
And so how much control is there over what is being generated, would you say? So that's where I think people's fear comes from, because if it's growing itself and evolving itself and there's little management of it, what does that mean for us as a human race, as it were? I mean, to look at a very extreme example.
Yeah, there's a lot more control over it now than there was originally a couple of years back when the first large
Right.
language models were coming out.
Mhm.
Like when ChatGPT first launched and millions of people got their hands on it. Yeah, there were issues there because there weren't things that were foreseen as happening. Like people didn't foresee people asking how to make meth with a large language model and it giving an answer. You can't do that sort of stuff these days. There's guardrails on these models to stop them doing that. But there's a lot of open source technology out there now as well, which can be fine tuned to do potentially dangerous things. Now, it depends on the use case and how people are using them. If you're using something like GPT, for example, there are a lot of guardrails in place. You will struggle to make it say something racist now. You will struggle to get it to say something that OpenAI don't want it to say. And
Got
there's
you.
been a lot of research that's gone into how do we make these models safer, so they're more accessible, so they can be used by a mass market and not cause danger. With large
Got
language models, as they exist right now, there is no potential of them becoming Skynet and taking over. They are just generating text. They can't interact with other systems unless it's integrated with other systems by developers. The language model itself isn't a scary thing. It's just something that's creating text. How that text is used is potentially where danger can come, but it's not clever enough to do anything like Skynet right now.
Got you. So it's a little bit like back in the day when Trello first came out, and their growth method was just to get as many end users as possible starting to use the application. So people who were actually doing the doing in a business, they would get someone to come in, use the application, so like a marketing assistant or someone along those lines. And then it's almost like businesses had no choice but to adopt it. And it's a similar process here with ChatGPT. It just went wild. All the end users were using it. Everyone in a business was using it. And there was very little regulation, governance, and control from that point of view.
Yeah.
For businesses to be able to step in. They were quicker than businesses could react. So I suppose with you say it's generating text, but if you work in a law firm or if you're generating policies and these types of things, that could be quite risky if you're using that and there's very little regulation or governance from that point of view.
Definitely, and that's where fine-tuned models come into play. Like
Hmm.
most large language models, again, if we talk GPT or if we talk Claude from Anthropic, they're trained on mass data. So just as much data as possible to create the largest models possible. So like Llama by Meta recently released a 400 billion parameter model. So that is basically how so much data that has just been trained on to make the most knowledgeable model possible. That doesn't mean it's going to be good at these niche topics. It's very general. It's a jack of all trades, master of none. And that's where fine-tuning these smaller models comes into play. Something that can be very focused on a very specific use case. So, a small model that is trained exclusively off of law textbooks and legal precedent. So it's good in those areas and it can be more reliant. And a model that's able to self-source, so it can find where it's got those sources from, and every time you ask it a question, it's able to provide those answers. Okay, I said this is where I got that information from. You can go and fact check that now if you want to.
Mhm.
So for stuff like that, we can look at things like Perplexity AI that's existed for about a year now, where it's very similar to GPT, but it will provide you sources for every single thing that it says. It's not 100% reliable either. I've gone searching for certain bits of information, been told a stat, been given a source. That stat doesn't exist in the source, but I didn't just put that in my presentation deck because I was able to go and check it out and find out that it was a hallucination straight away.
Got you. So the
OpenAI are
amount of
also going this route a bit more as well with their announcement at the end of last week of Search GPT, which potentially is a perplexity killer.
So from that point of view, then, the more data that you can help it ingest and understand more about your specialist area to stop it becoming a generalist and enable it to become a specialist, prevents the volume of hallucinations. And you can also, I'm presuming, be able to write algorithms that say you must always reference the point where you've got that information from, or having that as part of your query when it's producing
Yeah.
an output.
Yeah, there's a lot of methodologies that are going into making sure these models are hallucinating less, and we have seen a massive decrease in hallucinations over the last 12, 18 months from when
Mhm.
GPT 3.5 first got released.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of scientific research into how we do this. So, training smaller models on a more confined set of data, definitely one method. Another method is RAG systems, so retrieval augmented generation. This is basically a vector database of information that the language model will look at in real time to pull actual relevant answers out rather than just making it up based off of probability of what word comes next.
Got you.
And then there's been a lot of scientific research that's gone into just grounding of models, as it's called, which is essentially making sure they're basing everything they're saying off of some truth.
Wow. Okay. So how are you using that then in neural voice? What does that look like for you, and where does your passion come from that to start using it in your business?
Yeah, so I'll give you a bit of backstory of Neural Voice and where it came from. Like, I've always been a sci-fi nerd since being a child. Like, if I unblurred my background here, this is just a shrine to Star Wars. My bits I always loved about sci-fi were the interactions you could have with, like, AI and droids. Like, I love the idea of C-3PO being your companion or your friend, someone you're able to actually speak to. And it doesn't so much feel like it's a full robot. They have a personality, they have a persona. So I've always wanted that to exist from a sci-fi nature, and got really excited when I was younger and Alexa released and Siri released, and it started to feel like we were on this trajectory to making that come true. And it never
Mhm.
really happened. Like, having a conversation with Alexa isn't like speaking to a droid. It's very transactional. You say something, you get a response. You say something, you get a response.
Mhm.
Whereas an actual conversation has ebbs and flows to it, and you feel like you're able to create an emotional connection. You can't do that with Siri. So we started working on neural voice. The idea of being able to make a conversation have actual flow with an AI, sound realistic and not like a robot, and respond in real time. Like, you don't speak to a person and get a response 5 seconds later, unless you're on a Zoom meeting and they've got bad internet. But
Got you. Yeah.
normal in conversations, you get a response within 0.45 seconds. That's the natural human response time. So that's our target with neural voice. And then we started looking at how do we bring this into businesses? What are the natural use cases when you've got an AI that can speak like a human? The obvious ones are customer support service, tech support, sales support. Those sort of roles often happen over a phone. So we started looking at how do we do that and how do we make sure it's using reliable information about a business. So if we look at a sales support assistant, for example, a sales support assistant that's handling inbound leads on a customer's website or over the phone, well, most questions can be answered by the website alone. So when we take on a new customer, the first thing we do is scrape their website. We understand everything there is to know about their business from a public-facing view, so we've got the answers to most questions anyone's going to ask them. We then work with the customer and they provide us additional documents of information they might want the AI to know. For example, maybe it's a SaaS business that doesn't have pricing on their website. They've got it in different documents, but they want the AI to be able to discuss pricing. They might provide us
Mhm.
that document. And then we use what I mentioned earlier, RAG, to basically have give the model access to that information in real time. So it is relying on that actual factual information of the business to give its answers, rather than just coming up with them based off of its own knowledge about the business. With if it's the smaller business, probably limited, or just coming up with hallucinations.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how we're trying to train these models on reliable information, so they are giving the best answers to businesses as possible.
Got you, got you. And so from your point of view then moving forward, what do you think that can start to look like in the future? What does the roadmap look like in starting to evolve that?
Um, I've got my huge vision of the future where I see, as I mentioned, these conversations being human-like, feeling like you could be able to have an actual conversation with a friend that is an AI. That's what my vision is for the sci-fi future. But for the more practical business side of the future, I do see a lot of call centers being replaced with AI. These sort of conversations where the same question gets asked like over and over again, the same 20, 30 questions. That's what most call centers are dealing with. And then it's how do we actually action this information on the calls and create outcomes? So Neural Voice already integrates with over 500 different systems, from CRMs to CMSs, to create automated actions after a conversation. The obvious one is if it's a sales assistant that you've got the AI for, it's going to fill in your CRM details afterwards. So if someone leaves their email, their phone number, their business name, automatically that's put directly into their HubSpot, their Pipedrive, their Salesforce in the correct fields. Now, that's a huge problem for a lot of sales managers because they don't have sales reps to enter data into the CRM. Like, my
And also
background
sales
is a
aren't
sales
great.
manager. Yeah.
Yeah, and sales aren't great at managing data. I
Yeah,
mean, it's
it's
the
a nightmare.
marketing person's worst nightmare. I'm just
Yep.
putting that out there. Salespeople are the worst nightmare for marketing
Yeah.
people. So I'm loving the sound of this.
Well, yeah, and I was bad at it too when I was in sales. Like, it's the last thing you want to do to go manually start entering data into your CRM. You need to pick up the phone again and make another sale. I don't care about all that admin side of things, but
Exactly.
Neural Voice can be handling 1,000 calls while also entering all this data into the CRM in real time, giving managers the complete visibility of every conversation with full recordings, full transcripts, summaries, and all the details collected in it. So it's having the exact same conversation a salesperson would, but infinitely scalable, and all of that data is creating those actionable outcomes instantly.
From that point of view in how you see it evolving, one of the things you mentioned there could probably alarm some of the people who listen to this, podcast from the point of view of, is it going to replace my job? You mentioned about going into contact centers. Could end users even be affected, and that their jobs are then scaled down, or what does that look like? Or is this something like a shopping center when we had self-checkout starting to emerge, and it's just a lot of panic over nothing? What do you think that looks like?
Yeah, I think it's a middle ground, really. I think a lot of call centers right now are understaffed, and they are constantly with a backlog of calls. Like, you don't call
Hmm.
up many call centers like your bank or something and you're straight on the phone with somebody. Like, these
Sure.
people working in these call centers never have a minute of downtime because there's always 100 people waiting to pick up the phone. So
Hmm.
there is a need to triage calls better. And
Yeah.
often these people that are working in the call centers don't have the time to deal with the more challenging problems because they're dealing with the mass volume of calls, which are usually simple 5 or 6 question phone calls. So we see Neural Voice or similar systems being able to triage these calls, deal with all of the simple calls, and then give the employees more time to spend on the more challenging problems, which are more intellectually stimulating as well. So they're able to focus their talents where they're best applied rather than answering the same 20, 30 questions on repeat.
So it could even lead to then better employee satisfaction is where you're
Exactly.
going with this. You think people could actually enjoy their job more because they're being stimulated, because they're being challenged, and they're not doing monotonous work over and over
Exactly.
again.
Yeah, exactly that. And yeah, I think it's like one of the main use cases we've got right now as well is Neural Voice is really good for handling calls out of hours. A lot of businesses can't afford to pay call centers 24/7,
Mm.
but often you get calls after hours because if you're a B2C company, people call after work. So you need to be accessible at that time. And Neural Voice is able to triage those calls, help with the basics, and if it's something more serious, leave notes for the once the call center reopens to give these people a call back straight away.
When we had, I think you had a chat with our researcher before the call, and one of the things you mentioned was about Scarlett Johansson and something going wrong along those lines. So when can AI go wrong, and when can it then be a major concern for businesses?
Yeah, that whole case was. I don't know really where to start on it. I'll start with some backstory on it. So I think
Okay.
it was in May of this year. OpenAI announced GPT 4o. O standing for Omni. So it was multimodal, meaning it could take video, it could have voice on the outside, you could take in voice and have conversations similar to what Neural Voice could do. They said they'd be releasing the API within a couple of weeks. We're about 3 months later, still nothing. Typical OpenAI, overpromise,
Shocker.
underdeliver.
Yeah.
But what the big drama around that was one of their voices that they released with this sounded very similar to Scarlett Johansson. Now, Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, has said that he's a big fan of the film Her, which is basically an operating system that is a voice-controlled operating system. Incidentally, I also love the film. Fantastic film.
Of course you would. Natural
But
geek, as you said
yeah,
earlier.
exactly. But the person that voiced this AI system in it was Scarlett Johansson. So a few months prior, Sam Altman contacted Scarlett Johansson saying, "Would you be interested in voicing our new AI character, so we can bring it to the masses and make this sort of film a reality?" She said no. She didn't like it. Which perfectly fine. She's allowed to say no to that. And then they released a voice that sounded similar to her. So she's threatened to sue, saying they had no, they couldn't license her voice. She said no to it, and they eventually took the voice down. This led to a lot of controversy, of course, around people's voices being cloned. I take a slightly different position on it. Personally, I don't think the voice sounded that much like her. It had some similarities, but it definitely wasn't her voice. But I also think the notion of them not being able to do a similar voice because she said no is ridiculous. Like, if a director reaches out to you and says, "I'd like you to be in this film," and she said no to it, and they hired somebody that looked a little bit similar to her, that's not a problem. That's perfectly fine. Like, this
Well, that
clearly
tribute
isn't.
acts.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
no difference to ABBA tribute acts or similar.
exactly.
They're still profiting off the back of their success.
But at the end of the day, like, that clearly isn't her voice. It's not been
Mhm.
trained on her voice. If they wanted to train it on her voice, they very easily could have, and it would have been a lot more accurate to her voice. So this just seemed like a big blow up over nothing to me personally.
So, on that note, then, you're saying if they wanted to, they could have. So, what does that mean
Not
for
legally,
me?
probably. If they
Yeah,
wanted
of
to,
course.
they could theoretically have done so.
Sure. But then if AI gets into the wrong hands, what would you say could be the risk to me as someone who uses voice banking, for example? So I ring my bank, I've got fewer security questions because they've got my voice recorded. What could that mean for me as an individual? Could that mean there's more risk, or what does that look like?
So those problems that a lot of people are raising, they're relatively solved problems now. So there's a lot of companies out there with voice verification systems that are very reliably able to identify an artificially generated voice. Even
Got
as the
you.
technology grows, there are inherent tell signs every single time within that data that shows it's an artificially generated voice.
I knew what you
Um,
meant.
So banks don't really have those issues because they're able to see this isn't the person straight away. The larger issue at play here is often with parents and children. So children, or let's say teenagers, they're often uploading to TikTok or YouTube. They're giving their voice out freely. With systems that are able to communicate and train off people's voices, it has already started happening where people train it off of a child's voice, then call up that parent with a ransom. So they make it seem like
Wow.
that person has been kidnapped. They are calling saying, "You need to pay this person within 5 minutes or we'll kill your child." That is a
Wow.
huge, scary thing that's out there right now and has
Yeah.
massive implications as these systems continue to grow. So, firstly, it's recommended now always have a safe word with your child that only they know. So if that situation does ever actually arise, if they don't say that word, probably a fake.
Yeah.
Secondly, get
We
anything
hope
like
it's a
this.
fake anyway,
Yes,
but
yes.
yeah, probably a fake. Wow.
Secondly, always call your child straight after that because they're probably just
Mhm.
off in the park or something, having fun, or in a shopping mall. But yeah, that is a huge concern of these systems.
Yeah, absolutely. I can well imagine. I mean, I hadn't even heard of that example happening, but it does scare you. And I suppose, it's not very regulated. There are no governing bodies behind it at the moment. No one is governing ChatGPT as a whole. You hear examples of people being able to get through university using it and things like that. And models are getting more and more sophisticated, as you mentioned before. So it makes it harder to detect something that is written by
Yeah,
ChatGPT. Although I must say, when I go through LinkedIn, and I can definitely tell when a post has come from
yeah.
ChatGPT, it
There
drives me
there
up the
was
wall.
a research paper that came out recently that looked at the rise of academic research papers released in the last 18 months and then over the history of time where certain words are mentioned in it. Because
Mhm.
GPT has favorability over certain words that aren't usually used within academic papers. Like,
Got
it
you.
really loves the word utilize for some reason. So, like, if you look at the Google Scholar graphs of mentions of the word utilize in academic papers, you see it just shoot through the roof after like 2020, 2021.
Wow.
There's a lot of words similar to that, so you can see where it's making its way into everyday sort of life now.
But it can help in terms of accelerating research to be able to get something into market from that
Yeah,
point of view. From a marketing point of view, I think it's a marketer's dream because to a degree, a lot of people just will then copy and paste what's produced, and that's the worst thing. What I think it helps do, and where AI is really beneficial, is it can accelerate your time to be able to understand a subject and be able to produce content or be able to have a detailed conversation about a subject that you're not that familiar with beforehand. So
yeah.
it does have its uses from that point of view.
Yeah, what one use that I've used quite frequently, I created a voice character with neural voice that was basically a UK lawyer. I'm running a startup. I'm not a legal expert, but there's a lot of legal questions that come up. So I can have a
Yeah.
conversation with this in real time and ask my questions and get mostly reliable answers. Like, I always check afterwards and see, okay, how does this actually impact it? But it tells me the sort of legal considerations I need to have straight away, so I don't have to spend hundreds and thousands of pounds speaking to a lawyer constantly.
How would people go about accessing this to play around with it?
Yeah, so anyone can go on our website, neural-voice.ai. We've got a few demo characters on there, ranging from actual B2B use cases to some just general use cases like the legal one. We've also got a medical one on there that can answer your medical questions. It's a demo. Don't take it seriously. Please consult with your actual doctor. But it gives you a sort of demo of the potential
I'm
future of the
dying.
technology.
Brilliant.
But
Brilliant.
one use case that we had recently, which we didn't think about at all at the start, but we went quite viral with it, is we released a AI politician that was stood in the general election last
Mhm.
month. So AI Steve. So Steve Endicott is our chairman. He's wanted to run to be an MP for years and years, and he saw the potential of using neural voice as a way to make him more appealing to the masses and have conversations at scale with individuals. So we created a clone of him, gave it his political views on everything from how bus routes should work in Brighton to how AI should play into politics to the war in Israel and Gaza. And we had thousands upon thousands of calls coming in and getting so many viewpoints on different things. We were featured on like Fox News, NBC, BBC. It went crazy, but it brought in a use case that hadn't really been considered before as potential for this technology. How do you reach the masses? How do you really hear from your constituents?
Wow, that's something that's really quite incredible, really. And if you think if you can put that into the hands of the end users, it really helps businesses. Well, I say businesses. It actually helps politicians move away from the traditional flyer dropping,
Yeah,
which is what they so heavily rely on. But you
yeah.
can
And
only
no,
get a
no one
set
wants to
amount of
speak to anyone
information.
when they appear at your door.
Exactly. And also, they may not have the answers to the questions that I have,
Yeah.
which is the most important part. So that is absolutely fascinating to hear how that rolled out. And so, what was the outcome of that? What was the output? So you've had this big success, and you've seen it. You've seen it roll forward. Have you had further inquiries from other politicians, or what does that look like in the future?
Yeah, we've had a number of different outcomes from it. So, firstly, one that was really important for me was being able to test our system at scale. So, having tens of thousands of conversations really put our system to the limits, and very glad it didn't fall over on itself. The only time it stopped working was when, on day one, it was leaked on X before we were ready to launch it.
Oh
A
wow.
UK politics page put a post up about it. It was on a Sunday evening, and I hadn't removed the billing caps yet of one of our providers because I wasn't expecting for it to go live. So we hit a billing ceiling quickly, but as soon as we turned that off, then we were perfectly fine for the next month running it. So being able to test our system at that sort of volume was really the sort of test we needed to give ourselves the affirmation that, okay, yeah, we've done this right. Like, everything is working. We can go live to clients now because if we can take this volume, we can take whatever volume we need. In terms of people reaching out, yeah, we had some US politicians reaching out and some agencies out there. Spoke very briefly to a campaign manager for one of the staffers for the Tory campaign. We had some outreach from an Australia political business Can't remember what that one was now. But yeah, we had a lot of people coming to us, but that sort of media exposure as well was huge to us. And personally, I've never had to deal with that level of exposure. So the amount of news agencies coming in, asking for interviews and handling all of that was a totally new experience for me. A lot of fun, really enjoyed it. I was exhausted by the end of it.
I can well imagine. Well, congratulations for the success from that point of view, because to get earned media coverage is hard work. So it sounds, but yet when it happens and it happens organically, it's some of the best coverage that you can get. So I'm mindful of time. We normally try to keep these, as everyone knows, to around 20 minutes, but we are running over slightly. But your advice for anyone listening to this who wants to start playing around with AI, or they hear a lot about it and they don't know what to do next, as a business owner, what would you advise them to do? How should they get started?
Just get stuck in on it. There's so many free tools out there. Like ChatGPT 4.0 is free now for anybody to use. If you don't know where to start there. Ask it where to start. It will give you answers on what you should be trying out, where you should learn from it, who you should speak to, the sort of articles you should be reading. Like the best way to learn about anything AI is to speak to AI. It will tell you where you need to get your knowledge from. Like it's so helpful at researching different topics and getting really in depth on a topic, or just keeping it at surface levels. So to learn about AI, use AI.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, thank you everyone for taking the time to join us. And thank you also, Jeremy, for your time on this podcast today.
No
we
worries,
really hope
Chris.
you
Thank you very
enjoyed this
much.
episode. Thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing everyone on the next episode. Thank you for your time.
Thanks a lot, guys.